a week or two ago, we saw reports that Richie Torres was, I'm trying to remember what the words were, resented and objected to the implication that they Democrats weren't doing anything. Hakeem Jeffries had a problem with the groups and happy that he's being protested from the extreme left and the extreme right.
The extreme left, like move on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then we had the State of the Union. Al Green, among others, protested. Al Green was the most sort of vocal about it. He was protesting cuts to Medicaid. And apparently the Democrats establishment leadership is very mad about this. And this also comes on the heels, obviously, of the reporting about Chuck Schumer deciding we want Slotnick in there, who seemed to feel that the best way to appeal to a national audience is to say that she's glad Reagan was president when she was 12 and not Donald Trump. She was 12, is my understanding. I was older. I missed voting for Reagan in the second time by about 3 weeks. So I'm a little older than she is. And I can tell you that's a very savvy person to be excited that Ronald Reagan was president when she was 12. I mean, good for her. And so she must really have a sense of what people her age were excited about. But give me your sense of this, because you and I were part of this in the aughts, where we watched the Democratic Party completely be docile and sort of play possum, even though they weren't playing, really, just be possums for the Republicans. And it was in the wake of 9/11. There was still almost like the country was still in a state of shock in many respects. But how can they think this is a good idea? And they don't seem to have a plan.
No, their plan was laid out right by James Carville in that New York Times op-ed, where he said Democrats need to take a strategic retreat or whatever, and just kind of step back and just let Republicans run the country and just see what happens. And I think that kind of advice is lapped up by Hakeem Jeffries, who doesn't really, want to do anything. The party was so flat on its back in the time that you're talking about, if you remember, that a nobody governor of Vermont named Howard Dean was able to almost snatch the Democratic nomination because people just wanted somebody who would tell George Bush that he sucked.
Yep.
And he was willing to do it. And so he very nearly pulled it off as a result of that. Didn't quite get there, which is the history, always the history of the Democratic Party. They just managed to hold on to power within their own party and then lose it to the other party. So yeah, we're right for a Howard Dean-like figure who is not actually that radical.
Howard Dean's politics were not particularly, they were on the sort of conservative Dem. He was against the war, but he was also sort of pretty conservative on a lot of other things that didn't really play that much in that race. It was really his big innovation was that he was the first one to get small donors. Yeah, right. He had that baseball bat, and he would.
And the 50-state strategy too, right?
That was how he ran for DNC chair.
Yeah.
After that, kind of amazing that he doesn't get any credit, by the way, for being DNC chair. Basically the only time that Democrats won
with the Obama, 06, right?
06 and 08.
Yeah. Pretty good years for them.
But, yeah.
So what do you think happens now? I mean, what is your sense? Are you hearing stuff? I mean, it does not feel, do we want to play this clip of Swazi?
I didn't end up finding a good soundbite for that, but I listened to a little of Tom Swazi's town hall yesterday, which he held. He was one of the 10 Democrats that voted to censure Al Green. And it was a variety of different callers people who called into his town hall, outraged over not pushing back against Trump enough, and also specifically outraged of voting to censure Al Green. And he's going back and forth with them, and he's like, some of these people in this town hall aren't even my constituents or whatever. But they're feeling the heat, and like, this isn't something that we're imagining, right? There's been multiple instances of polling showing how Democratic voters and lean Democrats, it's a majority position that they don't think Democratic leadership is meeting this moment. And then there was a poll that came out from the liberal firm Blueprint, Politico put it out there, that showed that it's the plurality position that the Democratic Party has no strategy whatsoever for responding to Trump. Only 10% said the party had a solid technique for dealing with Trump. And this is coming from a liberal firm that is backed by Reid Hoffman.
I think if Bernie Sanders were like 10 years younger, he could actually probably win the nomination this time around.
Yeah,
because you'd have enough partisan Democrats who are like, you know what, let's try this.
I mean, we may be seeing
nothing
in New York.
Mamdani
is polling very well in New York. Andrew Cuomo's just jumped into the race. And Cuomo, obviously has a lot of name recognition and a lot of sort of relationships, and his father, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll see. But Mamdani is doing quite well in the polling, and I think it's a reflection of sort of normie Democrats going, we need something. I mean, the amazing thing is that you've always, it seems to me quite obvious that a plan is better than no plan, right? I don't remember who it was that said that, but a plan always beats no plan. Always. Because if you have a plan, even if it is a bad one, at one point you can adjust. If you have no plan, you have no idea. You're always starting at zero. And are you hearing anything in terms of like people are like there is a broad-based problem with the leadership either in the House or in the Senate? I mean, somebody told me that a Talking Points Memo podcast, which is, I think like about as sort of like solidly normie Dem as you can get. They were talking about Chuck Schumer being in danger of being knocked off in 2028 when he runs again. And I mean, from Talking Points Memos podcast to God's ears. But is there a sense that, I mean,
there's also chatter, you would know this better, but there's chatter in Brooklyn that Hakeem Jeffries could actually be vulnerable this time. Like if they can find the right candidate, because they've wanted to challenge him, but he's got the machine locked down. He's a good local politician, so he's got, obviously has the money and the endorsements. So the left kind of never came for him in that district, even though he like baits them, like, come on, bring it. What do you got?
It's a different. His district is an interesting district. It's almost the shape of like a fat boomerang, and it goes from like almost like, I think, to Brighton Beach almost, all the way around the outer boroughs of Brooklyn, and then back into places like, I think it goes as far as Fort Greene. And so, and these are a lot, there's gentrification that's happening there. There's like, if you get out towards Coney Island, there's a lot of like sort of Russian immigrants who are rather conservative in some respects. I mean, so it's a very mixed, and then in between you have a lot of immigrant populations and Hasidic Jews, and it's a wide mix of voters, and it would be interesting to see if somebody could try and knock them off. I mean, you've got the Hasidic community that provides a very reliable voting block, because they're fundamentalists. They're told what to do by their Rebbe, and they go.
And that's tens of thousands of votes there.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like you're spotting. Yeah. He's spotted several tens of thousands of votes, which makes a challenge like insanely impossible because you then have to beat him by like 20 or 30 points. But if those outer boroughs are frustrated enough by the direction of the Democratic Party, you could see a change election being at least conceivably winnable. But yes, there is. But you can't beat somebody with nobody. And this is where the AIPAC and DMFI route of the left in 2022 and 24 in kind of killing in the crib that energy comes into effect, because if the squad grew from 2018 to 2020, they grew. 2022 grew again, but not quite as much because of $30 to $50 million spent knocking people like Andy Levin out of office. And then 2024, they threw that $100 million in to kind of shrink it back down. And so there's just less of a base on which to launch any kind of insurgency.
And we should say Hakeem Jeffries, a huge
helped organize that. Yeah.
Huge funding from AIPAC.
Yeah. And do you think? Sorry, to add to that, do you think that Hakeem Jeffries? This is a theory Matt kind of floated, and I'm trying to build it out. That there's a difference in between how Pelosi does politics, because she came in a pre-Citizens United time, and this is not to lionize her, but to say she's a bit more partisan. And how Jeffries in that kind of era and that type of Democrat has come up in the last 15 years with unlimited money in politics, and that's the only game they can play. Is that something we could kind of
that's an interesting point. That's an interesting point, because you could even take it further back to her upbringing in Baltimore under her machine politician dad, who taught her that, making sure that the trash is getting picked up and that, people are getting the social services they need, and that you're giving no-show jobs to the right people. And, she would go around with it as like a 12-year-old with index cards of who's on the machine's good list, who's on the machine's bad list, and doling out favors to the good ones. And so you, in that sense, you really had to work, block by block, which then she kind of brought more nationally. And yeah, if you're Hakeem Jeffries, you're trying to raise money by the hundreds of thousands. And certainly you're more detached too.
Right.
Like the machine politicians, they had their finger on the pulse, if nothing else.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, it'd be interesting.
They had their fingers around some necks too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Ryan Grimm, I guess we'll wait and see if there's if the stirrings. I mean, I think, Chuck Schumer strikes me as somebody who's very, very sensitive to the idea of being primaried. And rightly so. It's a much trickier thing on a Senate level from being, if he starts to alienate normie Dems, he really neutralizes the advantage he has from being from New York City. And things can happen upstate if you're not killing it in New York City. If you're Chuck Schumer as in a Democratic primary, sometimes it's enough to make him worried. Like the Baileys are sitting there and they're going is everything okay?
Yes, they are.
We shall see. Ryan Grimm, always a pleasure.
Likewise.
Thanks, Ryan.
See you guys.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.